welcome everybody to the show. This is an audio-only version, a quick review or a long review, who knows, of Yooka-Laylee. I am Matt. You can find me on Twitter at GameThinkTalk, and I'm joined by Matthew. Owen, where can they find you?
You can find me at SuperGamecast64. That's the Twitter for my podcast. If you want to reach my personal Twitter, it's at SGC64, Matt. And also on a90skid.com, of course.
Of course. So, Yooka-Laylee. First off, are you a fan of those stupid N64 platformers, Banjo-Kazooie?
Woo, those are fighting words, Matt. Those are, you're coming out of the gate strong.
Your parents couldn't afford Mario 64? They had to find
Banjo
in
whoa.
a bargain bin?
No, 1998, Banjo-Kazooie. I have fond memories of receiving it for Christmas, not Christmas Day, Christmas Eve from my grandmother. I came with a VHS videotape, a promo tape that I still own.
What?
I have fond memories of that. I also own Super Mario 64, so I played both of them. Loved them for separate reasons, but yeah, huge fan of Banjo-Kazooie. Not so much Banjo-Tooie, its sequel, but the original very much so.
All right. We can talk about Mario versus Banjo another day. But
yeah.
Yooka-Laylee.
Mm-hmm.
Who's this game for? Is it worth playing? Is the 96 platforming back? Did they do anything new? What's going on in this game?
So Yooka-Laylee, when I say it's a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, those words cannot be more true. It's not as much a spiritual successor as it's like a direct, I don't want to say imitation because it's much more heartfelt than that, but it is to a T Banjo-Kazooie, down to the menus, the style, the humor. It's very, very much Banjo-Kazooie 4. It's just not those characters. A lot of these developers who made Playtonic games, the developers of Banjo-Kazooie, or not Banjo-Kazooie, Yooka-Laylee, were original creative leads on Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong Country. So you're seeing a lot of the same ideas and the same people working on both titles. But it's weird to see who this game is good for, because it's very 90s, so there's a nostalgia pull to it. It'll do very, very well if you grew up on N64 platformers, specifically Banjo-Kazooie. But in a way, just like those old 90s platformers were good for the whole family, regardless of age, Yooka-Laylee is still a good game. Yeah, it's not 100% modern in its design and the way the game is played, but it's still a game that whether you're 6 or, 26, you'll enjoy because it's platforming. It's something that's skill-based and it builds upon itself, and there's a bunch of collectibles. The best part about this game is that it's not linear. It's kind of big open worlds, kind of how Banjo-Kazooie had the jigsaw puzzles you jumped into. Mm-hmm. Yooka-Laylee has book worlds you jump into, and they're big, massive worlds full of little bite-sized challenges that reward you with not jiggies, as they were known in Banjo, but golden pages. So it's kind of like this bite-sized challenges in a bigger world, kind of like Zelda Breath of the Wild, but more direct. And I think it works for a lot of gamers, whether you're casual or hardcore. So I'd say it's a game that everyone should try, but it's gonna stick the hardest with like the 90s nostalgia people.
So is it more like, what's the main gameplay loop? Is it about exploration? Is it about finding things? Is it more about puzzle solving? Is there challenging platforming, or is it a bit more like Banjo-Kazooie where it was just more about like a slower sort of nice stroll through the park as opposed to, tough platforming challenges?
So that's the thing, is that like Banjo-Kazooie, the actual storyline is very thin. There's a big old bumblebee named Capital B who's going to suck up all the world's books, and then he's going to use it for evil. ? And then Yooka and Laylee, they're just sitting there and their special book gets taken away. So you're going to go get your book back, you're going to collect the pages, and life is great. So there's not like a super big narrative drive, but when you jump into the first grand world, the Grand Tome book, as they call them. Yeah, they're called Grand Tome Worlds. You hop in there, it's called Tribal Stick Tropics, and it's just big and colorful, and they're just kind of like, hey, go do whatever. And much like the original Banjo-Kazooie, you slowly just find the gameplay path. Like, there's 5 ghost writers to collect, much like there was Jinjos in Banjo-Kazooie. You see that each world has 25 pages, and those pages are always tied to a challenge. And now you say, like, is it platforming? Is it puzzle? And that's the thing, is dependent on the theme of the world, you will get challenges that are platforming based, that are races, that are puzzles, that are sometimes they're arcade cabinets. There's reoccurring characters in the game that you'll see. Like one, I bring up in my review that's on a 90s Kid. It's a guy named Kartos, and he's an old, like, think of like a prospector inside a minecart. And he, in each of the worlds, he has his own little challenge that is like a direct copy of Donkey Kong Country minecart levels. Okay. And that's like his thing. There's also a pixelated T-Rex named Rextro, and each world he has an arcade cabinet that is like, you can super see it. Whenever you see it, you're like, oh, there's Rextro in his arcade cabinet. And if you find a play coin, you get to play his little arcade game, and that gives you, a pagey. And so those are like things that pop up, but then each world has its own thing. Like one world is a casino. So one of the challenges is like, hey, play this game of roulette while you run around like a ball and stuff. It's very innovative in the way that it pulls the world design into the challenges, but at the same time, the challenges, if you just broke them up into like a menu style, like play this, play that, it would be like a collection of, not Mario Party mini games, because that insults the complexity, but a lot of the minute-to-minute gameplay are bite-sized things that are their own self-contained idea, like a game of zero-G golf, a shooting gallery, tons of little things that are just really cool ideas that are there. You play them, you get your pagey, and you're on to the next thing. It's all really cool and variety abundant, but contained to the theme of the world, which is why I think it works so well. And it serves the kind of ADHD brain I have where I'm always trying to do the next thing, but everything is so quick that you don't feel like you're really missing out on anything. It's a very good pacing as you go through everything.
Okay, so we've got a lot of mini games, a lot of variety of gameplay. Is the majority of the game is it like a buffet in the way that you're never really tied down to one type of gameplay, or are all these mini games in service of an actual sort of main platforming style of play that is the brunt of the game? So is there one that is definitely the majority of what you'll be doing?
A lot of the game is platforming. And once again, this goes back to, it is exactly like Banjo-Kazooie. So if you played Banjo-Kazooie, you kind of know the moves you're going to acquire. Something lets you jump and kind of glide and hover, things that make you move fast. You can spit out things. You can grab fruits that change your element. So there's a bunch of platforming and light puzzle solving as a base, but it's the way they use them in new and inventive ideas that does create a sort of, like, as you say, buffet, where it feels like you're going from next thing to next thing to next thing. But the way the game introduces new ideas is also kind of concurrent with the way that they introduce new abilities. So when you start Yooka-Laylee, you can just kind of jump and run and hit things, and by the time you're done with the first world, you'll have acquired 3 or 4 new abilities that you buy by using collectibles that you acquire. So, like Banjo-Kazooie had golden notes. Yooka-Laylee has golden quills. They're in abundance. There's like 200 of them per level. If you collect enough of them, you can go to this little snake guy. His name is Trouser. Super suggestive. Okay. And he'll sell you, and that it kind of reminds me of Conker's Bad Fur Day in the humor some ways, but so Trouser will offer you special moves, and you buy those, and in a weird kind of Metroidvania way, you'll notice like, oh, I obviously don't have that ability yet, so I'll have to come back when I get it. And there was some things in World 1 that I couldn't do until I got the ability from World 4, so it always feels like it's kind of lending you towards a certain direction, but there's always something extra you can go and do. But like you were saying, it builds upon itself, and it's all centric to Yooka and Laylee, I should say, their moveset. So as your character grows and your abilities grow, you're revisiting old places and old worlds and new places and new worlds and finding a bunch of different challenges. So it's very much a collection of eclectic mini games and small 2 to 3 minute bite-sized gameplay, but it also grows exponentially, and you feel like you feel like you have like a bunch of different moves, and you're super powerful towards the end of the game. And it's a really cool progression they have. There's a ton of little progression things in this game, and it's kind of overwhelming at times and hard to describe because apart from the cool characters, like I said, there's Trouser Snake, and he gives you the moves. There's also a big vending machine named Vendy, And as you complete little challenges, she gives you tonics that give you a passive ability. So maybe you're the kind of player who likes to use the moves that let you traverse, because there's a power meter associated with using some of your special moves. So say you're the kind of player who likes to use the roll move and go really fast across the level. You like to fly a lot. You want to get the tonic that extends your power move. Maybe you like to fight a bunch, so you get the one that gives you extra health or stuff. There's a lot of little things that build upon itself as you go. It makes it a really weirdly modern kind of way in the progression, but it still feels very decisively 90s in the way the level design works out. It's super weird. I don't know. It's overwhelming, but I said in my review, it's a combination of both what is comfortable and familiar and unique. It's like a weird combination of nostalgia and modernization that is hard to quantify. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things going on at once.
Wow. All right. So it sounds like if you grew up and you were looking for a nostalgia hit and a return to that, you're going to be happy. What about people that have never played a Banjo-Kazooie or even played a Mario 64? What kind of gamer would be interested in this? Does it have more value beyond wanting the 90s to come back?
Now, that's something that I was conflicted with at first, because I started playing this game and I was getting a lot of nostalgia chills because I love Banjo-Kazooie so much. And as that initial kind of giddiness faded away, I started to look at the game as its own piece of entertainment, disconnected from the franchises that inspire it. And in that, I guess you have to look at the 90s formula of gaming and decide if that's something that really kind of interests you. Because at its heart, Yooka-Laylee is still about collecting a bunch of stuff. It doesn't have a super big narrative drive, and that is something that people expect even from kind of more casual games. People still expect like a sort of invigorating story, and that's not really there. And a lot of Banjo-Kazooie's quirkinesses, I was able to overcome, but somebody who has no knowledge of the series, they might find it a little bit weird. You played Banjo-Kazooie. Mm-hmm. Do you recall how the voice acting was done?
I'm gonna assume it's like gobbledygook.
Yeah, it's essentially a bunch of grunts and sighs and sometimes like belches.
Which I always thought was Nintendo of Japan making fun of how Americans talk.
Now, it's funny because like back then you didn't have fully voiced cutscenes, and it was like a funny little gobbledygook kind of like talking like whatever. You're talking gibberish. In 2017, 20 hours of like blah 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 could be so aggravating, but if you're used to it and you grew up with it, it's like, you've already heard it. It's kind of nostalgic, but some of the more finer points could be a little bit not lost on newer gamers, but aggravating because, they have no connection to it. So in that way, I think some of the sound design can get annoying. If you don't like collectibles, the challenges are still fun, but a lot of Yooka-Laylee's gameplay is tied to collectibles as well. So if you remember in Banjo-Kazooie, you could transform into different creatures. That was tied to collecting little tokens. In Yooka-Laylee, there's one single collectible. It's called Molly Cool. It's a little molecule thing. And if you collect it, then you can transform. So if you just want to transform and the idea of searching hidden nooks and crannies for this collectible doesn't really sound like a cool thing, then you're not going to like it. Think about Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in the Korok seeds. These small little things like, finding, like that was a cool thing because you like exploring the world and looking at the smaller points of it. If you're more just looking for action, quick stuff, and you don't want to explore or really grind out the collectibles, I could see Yooka-Laylee being a little bit repetitive or long in the tooth for those kind of gamers. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say if you have no love for 90s platforming and you're a very modern gamer, probably approach it with caution. But I still think the 90s platforming, it holds up. Because in 2017, with all these modern games around me, I found myself glued to my TV for 22 hours, and it felt, I'm ready to go back for another 20 hours. My biggest complaint was that there's only 5 worlds. Now, to that point, there's something I want to bring up. In Banjo-Kazooie and all other N64 platformers, you would, jump into a painting, you would go into the jigsaw world, whatever. In Yooka-Laylee, it's doing the same thing, but it allows you to go outside of the world, and after you've explored a little bit, you can actually expand the world to about double the size. Oh. So there's also an organic growth of the of the levels themselves. So I went into the first world, found, 10 pages, did about 10 challenges, bounced back out, and they're like, hey, do you want to expand this world? And I'm like, well, I have enough to go to world 2 and check out the new world, or expand this first one.
Do you have to choose one or the other?
Well, not exactly, because especially in the beginning, they're very, very light on how many pages it requires to open. I think like the first one to expand it requires 3 pages. So if you spend more than 20 minutes in the first world, you've seen it. But expanding the world is what opens up those later level challenges that you need the abilities for. But it also organically grows the characters and the self-contained storylines that are in those worlds themselves. So that was a cool way that I saw an expanse. Like I said, each world feels like 3 Banjo worlds because they're so massive. So in that way, maybe I would have liked a little bit more variety of the worlds, but the fact that they're so big and the draw distance is really well done, so you can see them all at any given point.
Okay.
It's a really good sense of scope that makes you feel like, wow, this is very much a 90s platforming game, but on a modern scale. And I think that's to its both best benefit, but also, like we've said, if you don't like 90s platforming, it's also its greatest downfall there. It's still just a 90s platformer.
Okay. Now, yeah, about the gobbledygook, I think Breath of the Wild handled it really well because there was a lot of text that wasn't voiced, but they would just put in maybe a sigh at the beginning of the paragraph. They didn't feel the need to. I mean, if you were listening to a whole emotional monologue, I don't think you'd want to be hearing like "goo ga 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 ga" for minutes at a time. One of the things that pushed me off of Banjo-Kazooie was the original. Was that I didn't like the way it felt to move. What I've always loved about Mario games and any real game is it has to feel good to jump. The physics need to be nailed. So how are the movement physics? Is it a joy to move around, or is it more of just a means to find the next pagey?
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because don't let me forget to bring up Elder Scrolls Skyrim. That's a very big thing I want to bring up.
Okay.
But the Banjo-Kazooie, like you said, often felt stilted. When you do a special move animation, you also often felt like you were locked into something. You couldn't really control where you were going. And Mario 64 did have that fluidity. It felt like everything tied very well together. And Yooka-Laylee has that fluidity, and it has that really, really good control in almost every way possible. The only thing I do have an issue with is the turn radius when you're rolling. Your roll is the fastest way from point A to point B, so you're constantly using it.
Okay.
And you can't turn on a dime. And sometimes they want you to turn on a dime. So that control specifically, and this is kind of just a nitpick, that can be a teeny bit annoying, but at the same time I ran into that because I was trying to not fly through the game, but do things quickly and traverse long places in a quick amount of time. And also, when you get later abilities that allow you to fly, sometimes it's very Banjo, but if you remember how you flew in Banjo-Kazooie, you would use a feather and he would kind of flop, or she would flop, and it would be like the stilted kind of movement. The flying in Yooka-Laylee also feels that way. Like you ascend in kind of ticks instead of one fluid motion. So that's a little bit off-putting. But beyond that, the actual control and feel of the character, you can move very well in air. You always feel like you're making a jump. Very rarely did I feel like I was I missed a jump or messed up any sort of platforming because it was the game's fault. And the reason I want to bring up Skyrim is if you played Skyrim or Oblivion or many other games, oftentimes, depending on how the game is programmed, but Skyrim is a good point, if an edge is jagged enough, sometimes you can stand on it and continue jumping. It depends on how they want it. I bring up Skyrim because if you played Skyrim, you know that if you run up the side of a mountain, depending on how the rocks are platformed, you can kind of just cheese it in a way. Yooka-Laylee doesn't put butter all over their edges. A very jagged edge could be jumped off of. And in the first world, it's very much a vertical world. There's a lot of mountains and blocks. And when I found out that I could jump on ledges, very, very small ledges, and kind of jump around, there was a weird sense of kind of, I'm making my own game out of, I'm going to reach the tallest point on this map by jumping off of places I'm not supposed to. And once that allowed me to skip a challenge without having the ability I was supposed to. So I don't think they intentionally want you to jump around like that, but you never feel restricted. And to that point, I was able to make very difficult jumps that were not pixel perfect, but I'm really getting close to not making them because the controls felt tight and I felt confident in making those jumps. So not only is the actual gameplay and the game design good, but the controls and the actual traversal of those levels feels good and is fun to play as well, which is a lot when it comes to a platformer.
So it sounds like a fairly glowing review.
Yeah, I remember what I gave it. It's a high score.
Could you reveal that here, or are we going to ask people to go to the site?
It's a 9.5 out of 10.
Hey.
Yeah, I mean, that's weighted because I like to... I feel like I shouldn't have to say it, but I'll say it. It's a review, which is a singular opinion.
Yes.
My opinion comes loaded with I loved the original Banjo-Kazooie, and I was hyped for this game, and I also grew up loving 90s platforming. So as a game that panders to me specifically, I am going to enjoy that. I would say reasonably, for somebody as a newcomer, I couldn't see anybody ever giving this a score lower than, at its most brutally low, a 7.5. I think this game will round to 8 5s, and if it hits the right audience and it resonates with the nostalgia demo they're hitting, I think it'll even out towards like high 80s, low 90s when we're looking at like Metacritic and aggregate sites. This is something that it's special to the right group, but if they market it correctly, I think it might be able to pick up some of these newer gamers because in a way, like I said, it has that ADD vibe of like very much a lot of stuff. Like you said, a buffet. It's not an assault on the senses, but it's very much, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can make the game what you want it to be. And it's a good time. At the end of the day, I was playing a section of the game and I giggled like a 10-year-old boy. And I don't do that. Games don't make me do that ever. So if a game is able to make me do that, it's got some points.
Sounds good. On the subject of reviews, I was perusing N4G, which is not very good for your soul. And there was a comment about what Brad Shoemaker gave Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, Giant Bomb uses a 5-star format, and he gave it 2 stars out of 5, which to me means a little bit below average. It's not a disgusting mess.
Yeah.
But it's not. It didn't come together enough to give it, say, a 3, and it was nowhere close to 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Anyways, that becomes a 4 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the comments was 4 to 10. That's absurd. What a bullshit review. And the thing that this is why I don't really like numbers. I think that it's fine to put a number for a review score if you understand that, like you said, reviews are an opinion.
Yeah.
If anyone who doesn't think their opinion is a fucking moron.
Jumping off of this, I mean, this isn't Yooka-Laylee related, but I reviewed Walking Dead episode 3 recently on 90s Kid, and I gave it I believe it was a 5.5. Now people would be like, what the hell? That on a 10-point scale is average. It is dead in the middle.
Sure.
The problem is
it feels bad.
It feels
That's why
low.
I think out of 10, no one ever gives anything like a 3, 2, 1. That doesn't even exist.
And that's why that's why I feel like if I ever get a game that I don't like, I feel like the games industry, when it comes to 10-point scales, is so much anything below a 6 is trash, and 4 or 3 is unplayable. And I say you really have to gauge based upon the industry. If everything is playable, you're not seeing any games that come off like super unplayable. Those are far and few in between. So those should be your 1s and 2s. We are now seeing games that are, you can play them. Every game is playable. There's no longer broken pieces of crap. Those ones that don't really interest me, they fall at 5s and 6s now. Those that have glaring issues, those are 4s. And that's not when you put a 4 on a game, that is like putting it in the coffin as soon as someone sees that score. And I don't think that's how a 10-point scale should work. And like you say, it's a review is an opinion, but at the same point, like, we're using a 10-point scale, and sometimes I wish we used a 5-point scale. I do movies that way, but I think that there's enough minutia in video games that if properly used, a 10-point scale is the best way to do it. The problem is that everybody loves to see their favorite game get something higher than an 8. So if it's anything lower than a 7, people freak out.
Well, I mean, you're using more like a 40-point scale.
True.
Because you use 4 points per number and like 0.25.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a big problem is that people take it seriously and that they aren't mature enough to realize that just because you like something, it doesn't mean you just need to have the confidence that you can like something and not other people enjoy it. I think that a number works, but what people need to realize is that a review can only be based on the personality. You need to get to know your reviewer and realize that they like the same things you do. So that's why I would ask you a question. Is this good for somebody who likes Banjo-Kazooie? What about someone that hasn't? But you're coming, I mean, you like, I like that you said you're coming at it from the viewpoint of somebody that wants this game. And that's really who this game is for. That's why they put it on Kickstarter. That's why they say things like made by the same people that made Banjo-Kazooie. That's why the name is just a remix of the word of the name Banjo-Kazooie. It's that's what it's for. So people need to, if you just look at a number, you're a moron. Unless you know that reviewer inside and out. And I mean, like I've brought this up before. Jeff Cork at Game Informer. I think that guy's hilarious, but his taste in games are so different from mine. I think a game like Firewatch was one of my most memorable moments of the year.
Yeah.
And he gave it a very average score. He gave it like a 7 or something. He thought Thumper was like very below average. And I thought that was one of my most memorable, most visceral games of the year. So people need to just actually read reviews and also something like Metacritic is a problem because it just celebrates the number, and that's a huge problem. You can't aggregate a bunch of different personal opinions that are different because there should be people who think Breath of the Wild is a 0, and there should be people that think it's a 10, and there should be. But the whole point is, why do you think it's like that? Like when it comes to criticism, you should be able to come at it from any angle and say like, oh, Zelda culturally means we're brain dead as a nation or whatever. Like that's not a great example, but the whole point of it is that there should be this criticism, and then there should also be just a basic review. Is this worth spending your money on? If you want to play Banjo-Kazooie, did it do a good job of recreating that in 2017? And I just think the state of reviews is on the internet, people are not they're not reading, which is a big problem.
Yeah, that's my review of Yooka-Laylee is 2,300 words, which is quite lengthy for your standard mid-tier game review. But the point is that a lot of my conviction is in those words. I think reviews should go into minutia. They should go into detail because that is what backs up the number. Specifically on The Walking Dead episode 3, if you look at IGN's review of that and compare it to mine, myself and I forget who did the review of it over at IGN, but we echo almost the exact same sentiment, but they scored it higher than I did. But on if you just leave out the number and read it and gain your own kind of information from the text, we have similar sentiments. So the number is also completely down to the person themselves. And I think that's a problem too, is that a lot of time people don't want to read. They don't want to read more than 150 words. I think I saw statistics that's like 50 words, 90% of people read. And then after I think 500 words, it drops to like 20% of people read. No one wants to read long text. They want that instant gratification of seeing a 9, 8, or a 7 or a 6. But it's
they're like, can you put the review into a GIF?
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. That goes for a whole lot of how we digest information in the modern age, and that's a whole other topic. But people take opinion as fact oftentimes because they want somebody saying, hey, you should definitely play this, and they want an authority telling them, yeah, this is good, or yeah, this is bad. They want some sort of definitive answer. And hey, entertainment isn't that way. It's very subjective. You'll hate something I love,
and it should.
Yes,
you like the best entertainment should really please the tits off of someone who loves that kind, and it should almost offend somebody else. If you just make something that everybody likes, you end up with the Avengers. You just end up with these like very bland, nothing too interesting happens in any way. So I mean, I would want a Yooka-Laylee to make somebody who loves those platforming games so happy and make somebody who doesn't hate it and think that it's shit. And in a way, I'm almost supporting people going on Metacritic and giving out tens and zeros on the user section.
I'll say something that is far too philosophical for a Yooka-Laylee review, but it's a sentiment that should be echoed in this talk, is that great entertainment should be divisive because division causes dialogue. And entertainment that is good, which is also art. I mean, all entertainment is art in my opinion, but good entertainment, true art, should encourage dialogue. And a bunch of people standing around saying like, I liked it when Iron Man shot the bolt and it looked pretty. It doesn't create conversation. It doesn't make people think about their circumstance, think about things around them. And I'm not saying that Yooka-Laylee is a game that's going to make you ponder the you know, the finer points of life. But when it comes down to reviews and taking things subjectively and really looking at things, it pays to know that it's good to have somebody yelling about how much they hate your favorite thing, because a difference of opinion creates better entertainment. It creates topics, and at the end of the day, that's why we talk about things on the internet, is to have discussions. We want to hear people talk back. I don't want my opinion taken as fact, because it's not fact. It's founded, but it's not fact.
No, and that's right. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be controversial.
Yeah.
Because just having it be a conversation starter for the sake of conversation is very cheap in itself too, but it should be like spicy food. I hate it, and some people, you know, they live for it, but it should be. Anyways,
it should be, philosophy.
I think we.
How about them Yooka-Laylees?
I think we covered that. It's definitely something that is super interesting to me lately. Is just how much people take these reviews personally. And it just reminds me of being a child and thinking that the Sega Genesis was better than the Super Nintendo just because I had one console and that's all you had back then. And and people, they attach their identity to a product they own, and that's very sad. And you shouldn't, you know, I don't have an Xbox One, but I want Xbox One to do very well, because if they don't, then what you'll have is, do you know why wrestling is bad now? Because they bought WCW and there's no competition.
Competition drives innovation.
Yeah, you need Xbox to keep Sony honest. And I hope that Sony puts out another... that makes it sound like the Xbox division makes Sony's TVs.
No, I get the sentiment. I understand.
That's why I want to see another Vita, because what if Nintendo's the only handheld device in the market? That's not a good thing either. We need to have people pushing each other, and otherwise they're just going to jack up the prices and they're going to lower the quality, and you're just going to get a worse product. So, as consumers,
we can't be content. And I mean, this is all very topical information. I mean, when I drop a 9.5 out of 10 on a 90s, like, you know, spiritual successor, I'm sure some people will be like, "What, really? And it pays to have this talk. It's an important sentiment.
They're gonna say, "Oh wow, big surprise!" The site
a 90s
kid gave a 90s platformer a 9.
That's the whole point, guys. If you didn't expect it, then you're reading the wrong site. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, but you would have been honest. I mean, if it didn't have that loop, if it didn't have that good feeling there, I'm surprised. I would have thought you would have been so burnt out on the game and dead by this point, but you still want to go back. And...
No, I mean, if you're looking, we're called the 90skid.com, but honestly, so many different, I don't want to say developers, but so many different people just try to go after the whole 90s nostalgia. Like, that is a constant hunt that people are on, whether it's Hollywood or music or whatever. Everyone's trying to grab that 90s nostalgia charm. And the site a90skid.com is probably going to be the most critical, I would say. We don't necessarily pander. We're not clickbait. So we're pretty critical, especially when they're going after that, because 90s nostalgia is something that is it is so hard to pinpoint and is so often tried to go for, that I'm sick of getting like my hopes up and really trying to, I can't wait for this great thing I love to come back. So when something does it right, it deserves to be praised. So I'm not saying that my review is loaded because we're a 90skid.com, but it's I know my stuff. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, it should essentially put them behind the eight ball because they're coming at it from this nostalgia reason, and we're definitely, well, I can't speak for you, but I would feel like I'm definitely not going to give you points just for the nostalgia. It's almost like you have to work a little bit harder.
Yeah, I'm the audience you need to impress. Like, I've seen the nostalgia before. Give me something more than just nostalgia.
And impress, they did. There you have it. Thank you for talking about Yooka-Laylee. You can read this review on a90skid.com, and they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, at SuperGamecast64 for the podcast, or at SGC64Matt if you want to talk to me personally.
All right, everybody. My name has been Matthew Falvey. It will continue to be Matthew Falvey. You can find me on Twitter at GameThinkTalk. Sorry for the shit audio, but this was too good to wait. Bye for now.